Having a plan for your business sounds so simple. In reality, it's often an overcomplicated, stressful mess. People respond to extreme situations in very different ways, and that's true for all kinds of disaster situations. And for many, the COVID-19 situation is just that. This week, my guest is Rodger Edwards, and Rodger has built his career on 3 magic words: keeping marketing simple. In this episode, we talk about why pivoting should really just be an adjustment to what your customers want, and how the content creator lifestyle can support you through the tough times, and going big on personal branding can help you stand out during lockdown and beyond. And we talk about much, much more. Hi there, and welcome back to Amplify, the Digital Marketing Entrepreneur podcast. I'm Bob Gentle, and every week I'm joined by amazing people who share what makes their business work. If you're new to the show, then take a second right now to subscribe so you don't miss new episodes, and you can grab some older ones when you're done with this one. Don't forget as well, you can join my Facebook community. Just visit amplifyme.fm/insiders and you'll be taken right there. So, welcome along and let's meet Rodger. So this week I'm delighted to welcome back to the show Rodger Edwards. Rodger, I think you were one of my very first guests back in 2018, something like that. And I remember that because I was super nervous. I was very new to podcasting. And I think we've kind of kept up a bit. We've met each other a few times and you've got some really exciting news. So I was really keen to have you back on the show to talk about lots of different things. But for the listener who hasn't listened to virtually every single episode, and why haven't you? Why don't you just tell us a little bit about who you are, where you are, and the kind of work you do?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Bob, for having me back. Absolutely delighted to be back on the show. And yeah, as you said, we have kept in touch. We've met at a few conferences, although I guess since COVID came along, those haven't been in person, which is a real shame. Well, I'm Rodger Edwards, and I live in Edinburgh, have lived in Edinburgh for 27 years, obviously not from Edinburgh. I'm originally from Blackpool. I've spent the majority of my career in marketing, originally within the financial services industry, working for fairly big brands, to be perfectly honest. And I worked my way up from marketing assistant to eventually being marketing director of a couple of big financial services brands. I even ended up being the MD of one of the brands for a while. And that was probably a promotion too far, to be honest. But all the way through my career, I've always had this issue with complexity, and perhaps that is a result of having worked in financial services for so long, because UK financial services by default, by definition, a very complicated industry. And I got the opportunity in 2012 to leave big corporate, as I call it, big corporate in inverted commas, and to start working as a consultant with smaller businesses that are perhaps a little bit more nimble, a little bit more interested in doing new stuff, especially with digital becoming so much more accessible around that time. And so I left big corporate, and since then I've been enjoying working with smaller businesses as a consultant and also as a marketing speaker, helping people to put together simple marketing strategies. And really that's what I've been about.
I think one of the things I really love about you is your consistency. Mm-hmm. There are lots of people dabble, they try things, but you've been a podcaster for a lot longer than I've been a podcaster. You have a YouTube channel that actually does really quite well. Mm-hmm. You're doing virtual speaking, virtual training, that kind of thing, as I guess an evolution of the speaking that you've been doing consistently. Mm-hmm. And I'm curious to hear from you. Again, maybe this is something we can go into a little more deeply later on, but what did that look like for you at the beginning of that journey back in 2012? Mm-hmm. And how has that consistency in your own digital output in particular, how has your business evolved, and how has your experience of doing that changed over time?
This is a really interesting question, Bob, and I'm trying to think back. There was a point in time when I was still working in big corporate, and I was probably working on an advertising campaign, and I had a conversation. I can't remember it now, unless whether it was my boss or whether it was the head of the agency that we were working with. But I remember we'd been working on this campaign for a long time, and it was quite successful, and it brought business in. And we're having a meeting with the agency, and the idea was, we want you to effectively go away and come up with something completely different. And it was either my boss or the agency says, no, actually, we stick with this. And we probably stick with this for at least another 2 years, maybe 3 years. And the reason why we're going to do that is because it's working. And you're the only person who's sick of it and wants to move on, because you have devoted a fair proportion of your work time over the last 18 months to this. But the vast majority, if not all of the target audience, won't have spent anywhere near as much time on that or seeing that advertising campaign, and therefore they're not sick of it. It's working for them. So carry on doing it. And I think he drew an allusion to, or an analogy with the Smash advert at the time, for mash get smash, and apparently
it's quite a while ago.
Apparently a similar thing had happened. We should dump this thing that we've been using for ages, and their agency said no, don't, because this resonates with the consumer. And I think that as I headed out of big corporate in 2012, and I'll be perfectly honest, one of the main reasons I headed out of big corporate was they were frightened of using all this new digital technology that we were getting used to. They were scared of Twitter, they were scared of video, they were scared of other social media. They liked to do the old traditional marketing. And I think that one of the downsides potentially of digital is that it gives us opportunity to change what we're doing in the blink of an eye. And it becomes so much easier to say, do you know what? I've done 7 episodes of this podcast. It's not working. I'm going to go and do a video. And then 7 episodes of video later, do you know what? This video isn't working. I'm going to go and do something else. And everything's become so fast and easy to change that we've lost the sight of the fact that something successful and something consistent actually has long-term advantages. And if you do stick with it, then it's so much more powerful than going from one spot to the other, from one shiny toy to the other. But the pressure these days, Bob, and you'll know this as well from other conversations you've had with people, one person saying, no, you've got to be doing email. Another person says, no, you should be doing Facebook, and whatever it might be. And the tendency is, I'm going to change to something. I'm going to go and play with this other shiny toy. But the power of consistency, you should never underestimate it. Whether you're living in a print world, whether you're living in a TV advertising only world, or whether you're living in a digital world, consistency is likely to be more powerful than any of the shiny toys that you've got your hands on for a couple of weeks or a couple of months. So be consistent and keep doing the same things. Obviously, if they're working, if they aren't working, then you've got to change it. But sometimes it takes time for something to work. I can't remember, was it Mark Schaefer who said it's a minimum of 30 months when you start something to become known for it? Well, that's quite a long time when it's easy to say, right, that's it, I've done 7 episodes, I'm going to go over here and do something else.
I didn't know he'd said that, but that kind of rings true, and it kind of leads me to what was going to be my next question. Still is. And that's, when you started your podcast, like a lot of people, it probably felt like a bit of a waste of time, a bit of a vanity exercise for quite a long time. At what point in your podcasting career, sticking with the podcast specifically for the moment, did you realize actually there's something happening here? This is starting to have an impact on my business. Yeah.
I mean, I have to admit, it did start off almost like a vanity thing. When I left big corporate, when I was in big corporate, I was doing a lot of PR work. I was the marketing director, but I was also the main spokesperson for the company. And I did have quite a big profile within the industry. And when I left, I thought, I'm going to have to do something, even though I'm not working for a big corporate anymore. I'm going to have to do something to keep that profile up. So the original idea of the podcast was just to make sure people still heard from me quite regularly, and that was all it was for, to be perfectly honest. And I also remember at the time people who were becoming established as podcasters, people like Marcus Sheridan and a guy called Ryan Hanley, were always quoting this, if you make it past 7 episodes, you're doing well. Most podcasts don't get past 7 episodes. And I remember getting past 7 episodes and thinking, yeah, I'm enjoying this. That the early days was I just like doing podcasting. It's like it's just nice to talk to people in an interview situation. You learn as much from your guests as you hope your audience is going to learn as well. And then you say, I'm at episode 50 now, I'm going to have to celebrate that success. And then you get to episode 100 and you're going to have to celebrate that success even more. But Bob, it wasn't until episode 33, which is just shy of a year, that I can honestly say I got a piece of paid work out of it. And I know for a fact that it was an article for a magazine, and I think I earned 250 quid. And so somebody would say, so you did 33 episodes of a podcast before you got 250 quid back? And yes, I guess that's the answer. But by the time episode 88 had come, I got a 5-figure sum, so over 10 grand, in consultancy as a direct result of somebody hearing me on the podcast. And for a while, the podcast became my main source of new business, of new clients. In fairness, it's not fizzled out, it's gone down since COVID. I think a lot of podcasters have found that their download numbers have either plateaued or gone down slightly because people haven't actually had more time on their hands. Maybe the illusion is that they have, but a lot of people have been busier. But for a long time, the podcast was my main source of income, and a way of getting speaking engagements and moving into consultancy situations.
And I think there is the direct benefit of the tangible opportunity that comes as an obvious outcome. So the sales inquiry, somebody said, I listened to your podcast, I'd like to speak to you about a commercial opportunity. But then there are the other less tangible things, like your network has changed and you're moving in slightly different circles, and those circles bring opportunities. So,
and it's repeating those key messages. You said it before. I've been talking the simplicity thing in my career for 20 odd years. I've been talking about it in my podcast. I constantly repeat the same things, and I'll sometimes sit there thinking, "Oh, Rodger, your audience genuinely don't want to hear that again," but actually that's fine. It's like the theme music to EastEnders or the theme music to Coronation Street. It becomes part of what you do, and people remember it for that very reason. It's part of your script, and again, I think that consistency, it starts to, they call it an earworm, don't they? It's something that buries itself into your ears and you can't stop humming it. Well, people start to associate simplicity with Rodger Edwards. He's the guy who does marketing simple, engage, don't enrage, that sort of thing, and that's why I'm such a big fan of that consistency message.
Yeah, something I heard Matthew Kimberley say the other day was, if you want to be remembered for something, you better be repetitive.
Yes, absolutely right.
So I want to ask you about YouTube before we come on to the book, because I watch your YouTube videos occasionally, and they're a bit of a puzzle to me. They're really, really well made, and you kind of roam across lots of different topics. What would you say if you were to explain your YouTube channel to someone, how would you explain it?
It's a very difficult one, and I think that my YouTube is more of an experimental platform, to be perfectly honest. I'm probably if you go onto YouTube and watch the so-called YouTube experts, they will say you've got to pick a topic and niche down into that specific topic, annihilate the hell out of keywords around that topic, and do your SEO, do your search optimization and all of that sort of thing, and make sure that that is your focus, and therefore you will build this great big audience. Now I'm sure that strategy works. There's a lady I've been following, an American lady called Annie, recently, and she's gone from something like 2,000 subscribers to about 48,000 subscribers simply by doing videos that teach people how to do videos. It's nuts, but she's following this sort of focus rule that YouTube have. I have 3 types of video I do on YouTube. The first is, I call it Rodger vlog, and that's really just my behind the scenes life of me being a speaker and a marketing consultant, and as you would expect, until lockdown, the Rodger vlog tended to be me travelling to London to do a speech at Upreneur Summit, or me going to Belgrade to do a speech at a conference in Serbia. The vlogs have changed a little bit since, because I've not been on a plane or a train or a bus for 6 months, but that was more, this is Rodger behind the scenes. I then sort of do these videos which are called Marketing Made Simple, which are really 3 or 4 minutes of me just picking up on a particular marketing issue. Could be consistency, for example, and I just say, right, this is about consistency, this is why you should be consistent, blah blah blah, then call to action. So it's sharp and it's snappy and it finishes quickly. And I guess that the YouTube experts would say to me, Rodger, stop all that Rodger vlog stuff. That's you need to do, or you just need to do the Marketing Made Simple time and time again. But I'm not in this for multi-million followers and this, that and the other. Okay, you might get a bit of revenue out of it, I guess, but that's not what motivates me. What motivates me more about YouTube is testing things out and playing with things, learning how to do video, because the world we're in now, a lot of these online conferences are looking for people to really stand out in their online presentations, and a lot of those online presentations can be pre-recorded, and I'm sort of thinking a lot of these things are going to look more like mini television productions. So I'm trying to use the video, the YouTube experience, to learn how to put together a really well-made video. And you kindly said that they do look well-made. So I guess that experience is rubbing off. But yeah, I am probably breaking the established rules for being a successful YouTuber. Having said that, I have noticed my subscription rate has crept up more recently than it has done in the past, so maybe I have touched a few of the right buttons recently as well.
I think there are 2 reasons to use YouTube, or there are maybe two approaches to it. There's, I want to build my YouTube subscriber base in order that I can become YouTube famous for something.
Yeah.
Or there's, I want to use YouTube as a platform to express myself and connect with people.
Yes.
And I think that's what you do really, really well. That you're not sort of just turning one face to the world and being really, really quite sterile. But when you visit your YouTube channel, you get to know Rodger.
Yeah.
And that's actually what I think is so special about it.
And again, I think you can put an act on. You can have a stage persona, and a lot of actors do that, obviously, have stage personas. I guess some comedians do have that sort of thing as well. But I guess I've always just liked being me. Again, I can remember one of the early days of doing speaking. I was presenting at a conference in London, and a lot of people came up to me and said, "Oh, your speech was the best of the day, blah, 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 blah." And one person says, "And do you know why you stood out so well? It's because you've got a northern accent, rather than everybody else sort of having the sort of BBC polished sort of newsreader style approach. You just stood out because you talk like normal people." And, yes, you can put a facade on, but eventually the facade will slip and somebody will see into the real you. So why not be the real you straight from the beginning?
So let's talk about COVID, because that's kind of, it's caused you problems, it's caused me problems, it's caused everybody problems in one way or another. Mm-hmm. We don't really want to talk anymore about the problems that have come out of COVID, but where have you found potentially glimmers of lights, or you've learned new ways of approaching opportunities you hadn't really seen before? Or what have been the positive things that have happened in your world through COVID?
I think the big thing that the penny dropped for me quite early on, and again I was looking at a lot of the sort of what I would call global marketing gurus, and I always say guru with big inverted commas, and a lot of that, we've had this conversation before, Bob. Marketing isn't just about communications. It's not just about social media and advertising and email and promotion. It's also about understanding your customer, developing a product or a service that meets the need of the customer. And once you've done that and thrown a few goals in, then you can go away and start doing the communication. But early on in COVID, you got the global marketing gurus coming in with these, you need to pivot your business, you need to shift everything online, you need to focus on this. And I'm thinking, well, you might need to do those things, but everybody's different, every business is different, every individual's different, and the only way you can know for certain whether you need to pivot or whether you need to focus online or whether you need to go all in on Facebook ads is to do what marketers should always do, and that is look at what their customers' needs are. And it's very possible, and indeed it did, not possibly, it was the fact, a lot of people's needs changed because of COVID, and therefore you change your model, you change your product, you change your service to fit that new customer need, and then you go and you communicate it. And right early on, the penny dropped. You've just got to, you can't pivot until you know where you're going, and I got quite cross early on with some of those bigger, more famous is perhaps not the right word, but high-profile marketers who were just using it as a way to ram Facebook ads down people's throats, or you must pivot this, that, and the other.
Yeah.
And a lot of the work that I was doing, Bob, was speaking at events, and they all got cancelled. Doing workshops, travelling across the UK and Europe to visit people and do workshops, all of that got cancelled. Now, the immediate response to all of that would have been, following the advice of those gurus, is pivot, become online, totally online. And no, I had to understand what the customers were wanting. And unfortunately, a lot of those people who had booked me to go and do workshops in person in their offices were now in a bit of trouble themselves. They were having to work out whether to furlough their staff or whether to lay their staff off, whether to make the offices, completely sterile for when we ever came back, or move to working from home permanently. And actually, marketing on what I do was totally and utterly off the agenda for them. So even if I did pivot to be an online provider, those particular customers that I was well in with just weren't interested anymore. So it wasn't just a question of saying I need to go online, I just need to actually review who my actual customers are. Now, in fairness, those particular customers have ironed out a few of their problems and are starting to look back at marketing again, and it's coming together. But you can't just assume that because everybody says go online that's the thing to do. Having said that, there's one event that I am involved with as de facto marketing director, and it's a big in-person conference which takes place in a prestigious London hotel in July. Now, that obviously never went ahead. We postponed it until December, thinking that everything would be back to normal by December, and it's not going to go ahead in December now, as you would expect. But what we did do in July was a sort of mini online event. But rather than just saying, oh, we'll just go on to Zoom like everybody else is doing, or we'll just get some webinar software, go to webinar or whatever it might be and do a webinar, we'll actually ask people what they want. And a lot of people said, we're suffering from Zoom fatigue here, and the last thing we want to do is sit in front of a computer for an entire day listening to really long speeches on Zoom. So we thought, fine, no Zoom, no webinar, we're going to do it on YouTube. Pre-record 7 talks, each lasting 7 minutes, followed by 25 minutes of live debate. And we broadcast that live over YouTube. I think it lasted an hour and a half all told. And within that sector of the industry, it blew everybody away because they thought, wow, this is fantastic. It's so well produced. It looks and feels snappy, on point. It's hard-hitting and fast. And actually people sent us messages saying it went by in a flash, and you changed the speaker so often that we never, our attention span never went away. And I think that, you know, it was a total reinvention of what was happening in that particular sector, in the financial services sector. So that has been the biggest lesson for me, is don't listen to the people with the biggest egos and the biggest profiles. Go back to the basics of marketing, talk to your customers and work out what it is that they need, and then build your service and product around that need.
Yeah, I think I do not like the word pivot because it implies a degree of permanence. And that one thing I've been encouraging my clients to keep in mind is that you should never approach a short-term problem with a change in your long-term strategy.
Absolutely. And
that has worked out quite well. But that doesn't mean you can't adjust. You have to accommodate the current situation. You have to adapt, but still keep what was the initial goal. That goal hasn't changed.
No.
So you really just have to go around a mountain rather than through it.
And who knows where we're going to be, you know. Conferences, live conferences may not come back I certainly can't see a social media marketing world happening in the next 12 months. Maybe we'll get back to smaller events with social distancing. And I know that human beings, me as much as anybody, I do crave that live interaction with people in a room. And that discussion in the pub afterwards, you can't beat that. But for the time being, it's not going to happen. So we need to be mindful of that.
So one thing that you have done during COVID is your new joint venture podcast with Pascal Fintoni.
Yep.
Which looks like an awful lot of fun, because knowing you both, you have a lot in common.
Yeah.
And it really boils out in this podcast, which is hugely entertaining. So how did that come about? And what are your plans for that? Or I guess for the one or two listeners that might not have listened to it, what can they expect?
Right. Well, it's called Two Geeks and a Marketing Podcast. So it's a bit of an off-the-wall title. Now, Pascal Fintoni, I met Pascal at a Upreneur event probably about 5 years ago, and he was doing a speech about how to be better at using video. And I had a really long conversation with him the night before in the bar, which went on into the early hours. And then I saw his presentation the following day, and we kept in touch after that. And I loved what he was saying about framing shots and scripting and storytelling. And I immediately went out and started putting that into practice. And I guess he really appreciated the fact that I'd learnt stuff from him and was so keen to follow it up. So we became really good friends, and we would often find ourselves either going to conferences or just meeting up in Newcastle or Edinburgh and sitting in a coffee shop or in a bar drinking wine, having the sorts of conversations that we have on this podcast. And at the end of the session, whether it was coffee and we were both climbing the walls because of caffeine, or at the end of the session in the pub when we've probably had too much to drink, we said, you know what, we should have recorded that conversation because we got into some really interesting material about marketing and about strategy. And this went on, honestly, Bob, for about 2 years. And every time we finished these sessions, we'd say, oh, we should have bloody recorded that, shouldn't we? So we made a pact that we would actually try doing it one day and actually recording it. And that was really when the idea of the podcast came about. Let's have it as a show which has got the segments. So we start off with the In the News, which is simply news that's caught our attention over the last week. Could be a Asda launch a new pricing campaign or something. Then we have a segment which is all about focusing on a piece of content that's really caught our attention, and that's usually a podcast episode or an article in Marketing Week or something like that. And we go into that in quite a bit of detail, and why is the person written it like this? What's the angle? What's the implications for people? Then there's a section about tech, where what's our favourite tech app of the week or our favourite platform of the week. Then we talk about this week in history, marketing in history, launch of Sputnik, this, that and the other, whatever it might be. Then we do content spotlights, where we shout out names of people who are doing great things, and I think you got a shout out last week, Bob, for your podcast.
I did. It was a big surprise.
And it shouldn't have been a surprise at all. And then the final section, which is definitely the most off the wall, is called film marketing, because Pascal and I are both geeks. We're both science fiction geeks predominantly. We just pick a film and we talk about that film from the point of view of the film that we love, but also how was it marketed originally, or what could be the lessons that you can learn from that film. And we've only done 11 episodes, but we've talked about films from Flash Gordon. We talked about On Her Majesty's Secret Service, the George Lazenby James Bond film, because Diana Rigg had sadly died that week. I think we even did Mamma Mia one week, and it's just here's the film, here's what we like about it. But these are the marketing lessons that you can get from it, from how they marketed the film originally, or just if it's a 25-year-old film, how it's become part of the fabric of pop culture. So I think going forward, the biggest danger is that we love it so much that the episodes have been getting longer and longer, and we are trying to pull it back, but we do get carried away. And we did say, well, let's just see how it goes. We won't edit it, so we'll probably carry on until people say, for the love of God, do shorter episodes or something like that.
Yeah, I think maybe at some point the platforms are going to catch on that they have to put in some kind of chaptering for podcasts. But if people don't like it, they won't listen. And certainly anybody that does love film and wants to learn about great marketing using the metaphors and the stories of these films, it's a great listen. So you have written a book.
Yes.
And I know you've been working on this for a long time. And I saw the other day that it was nearly ready.
Yeah.
And I know yesterday or today you got your printing proofs.
Yes, I did. I've got it here in my hands. And honestly, Bob, it's such an amazing feeling to actually have a printed book. I know that most people don't read printed books these days, and in fact they probably buy them on Kindle, but the printed, so it's got not for resale and sort of draft splattered across the front, so it definitely isn't the copy that people who buy it will get. But yeah, it's in my hand. I can rustle the pages, and it should have come out earlier in the year, but the main aim of the book is almost like a big calling card for me to use for my speaking engagements and my consultancy. And given that most of that business effectively disappeared at the start of the year, it just didn't seem to me to be a priority to get the book out. And in fact, again, I spoke to a few people. On the one hand, they were saying, oh, but there's all these people on furlough who've got all this time on their hands. It's a great time to get a book out there. But then other people were saying, do you know what? I've never been busier, or I've got the kids to look after. I have not got time to read a book. So I thought, I'm actually going to just delay it. So it's going to come out soon, but obviously it's a bit later than I'd planned.
And did you delay it because you had other things to do, or was it more a proactive, no, I'm going to slow down on this?
No, it was definitely a decision to slow down. I mean, at the start of the year, I had a lot of events in my diary, and the idea was that the book would be part of the deal, and I would be allowed to sell copies, or at least highlight it. And when all of those disappeared, I just thought I could carry on doing it, but I just felt that I would have to spend more time and potentially money on actually marketing it to an audience who was probably busy with other things or worried about other things. I just thought I need to feel that the market for speaking and consultancy is in my niche is coming back. And in reality, it probably hasn't come back enough yet. But I thought, no, the autumn is the time to do it. So it's nearly here. It's nearly here. And the cover, the book's called Cats, Mats and Marketing Plans, which is it's a little bit of a weird title, but I didn't want it to be marketing for dummies or marketing made simple or anything like that. It reflects one of the key segments that I've been doing in my talks for years. It's quite a vivid cover. Designed by Cole Gray, who I think was on your show quite recently as well. Cole's done a fab job on it, so I'm really excited about that, and the visual is very important to me. So it's great to get here.
So what can the reader expect?
Consistent messages. Everything that we've said already, it's pretty much in there. It's all about. The two main things are, on the front of the cover it says how to build a simple marketing strategy and avoid complexity as your business grows. And that's really the two things that I'm about. Strategy is important. And by strategy, I mean what we said earlier in the show. It's not just about communications, Bob. It's about identifying your customer, the customer need, and building the product to service that need. That's the strategy bit. But as you know, academia and the internet and certainly big corporate can make strategy incredibly complicated. So the book really is aimed at people who haven't got a marketing background and perhaps find themselves in charge of marketing. It's almost like a simple guide to how to do the whole lot. And then the second part is, once you've got it in there and your business starts to become more successful and as you grow, how do you avoid complexity creeping into your business, as it often does as companies get bigger? So it's really a bit of two halves. It's put the strategy together, start to become successful, but then stop yourself from becoming complicated and bureaucratic as time goes by.
I think actually it would probably suit a lot of people who are in marketing roles and do have a marketing background as well, because I think there's definitely a trend where, I don't know if it's a trend or if it's what it is, but a lot of people will either jump straight to tactics,
yes,
or they will not really understand what strategy is. Now, anybody listening from a marketing background, don't be insulted. You're not that guy. But I do find a lot of people don't really understand what a marketing strategy is, and they confuse it with a tactical choice.
Yes.
And I know, having seen you speak, that painting this picture between, okay, this is a strategy and these are the tactics you're going to need to deliver that strategy. They're two different sets of decision altogether. And if more people got a hold of that, even when they're in marketing roles, because they're trained in complexity, not in simplicity. Yeah, it's not their fault. But a simple plan executed well will trump a complicated plan poorly implemented every single time.
Absolutely right. And I like stories, as you know, Bob, and one of the joys of being able to write this book is to use stories that have actually been real things that have happened to me throughout the years. So I tell the story way back of, one of the reasons I became so obsessed with complexity was because I remember being involved in a strategic away week where we all went off to some country house and they'd employed some consultant from a gigantic global consultancy. And he was a stereotypical person who opened his mouth and just management speak flowed out over everybody. It was almost like he was spraying management speak across the room. and we spent that week putting post-it notes on walls and rearranging the post-it notes and doing SWOT analysis and pest analysis. And I'm not knocking it from the point of view of it was a good exercise, but it was the complicated end of the spectrum. And I just remember, so many of the people were getting frustrated by this and just didn't know what they were doing there. And the upshot of it was, all we were really doing was saying, who's the customer, what's their problem, and how do we fix that problem better than our competitors? That was really what we were doing. And the book tells stories like that as to how this sort of simplicity thing became that earworm that will just not come out of my brain, and that I've been repeating year upon year, and hopefully that message will help people who might be starting to feel that their lives are just as complicated as that.
I think one thing that you really embody is, I'm sure I've heard this from both Chris Ducker and Gary Vaynerchuk. Like, I think Chris puts it in the terms of every business should embrace actually becoming part media company, or every personal brand business needs to embrace being a media company.
Yeah.
And Gary Vaynerchuk quantified it a little bit more firmly, saying every business should be 80% whatever it is they do for money and 20% media company. And you really embody that in a way that very few marketers do, in your world in particular, but in the world in general, especially in the UK. This almost creator lifestyle is something that I think so many people should embrace. And I guess I would sort of ask you for your reflection on that. If you met somebody in the street and they said, "Oh, this COVID, it's tough. I can't network. I can't see the people I used to see. I can't do all the things that I used to do." And then they're looking at YouTube and podcasting and thinking, "This looks like a very long road."
Yeah.
What would you say to them?
Wow, it's an interesting one. Just picking up on the media company thing. After we did that online conference I mentioned before, 7 Talks for 7 Minutes, I was talking to the CEO of that business, and this was completely unprompted from him. And he says, "I've been sitting here reflecting upon what we've just done," and he said, "For the last 15 years we've been a conference company. We put on a conference once a year." He says, "Do you know what? We're not that anymore. We're a media company." And I thought, oh yes, there you go. Somebody, for the pennies dropped for somebody, and he's absolutely right. And this is a bit of a conundrum for me, because I think if you think about generations, I am Gen X. Now, a lot of Gen X people, and I've seen Marcus Sheridan write this recently, people probably in their 40s to early 50s, a lot of them are actually technophobic, or they don't like digital. They're a little bit nervous with video, probably a bit suspicious of social media, and that is certainly my experience within the financial services industry, and one of the reasons why I got out of big corporate. And I've often wondered why I'm a Gen X person that seems to have embraced all of this stuff and hasn't been fazed by it, and is I sit there sometimes think, I wish I'd had YouTube when I was in my 20s. I would, I'd just love to have had access to YouTube when I was in my 20s, and all these cameras and this recording equipment. When the first time I ever appeared on a video, it cost the company about 40 grand to get a film crew in to come and film us and edit the videotape. I think what I would say to people is that COVID has taught us that the world can change, and it doesn't necessarily have to go back to where it was. Now, an example is that I spent a lot of time travelling all the way around the UK, because a lot of the people I do business with just would not have Zoom meetings. Now, I've been using Zoom for my podcast like you have for many, many, many years, 5 years maybe. And yet I've had a lot of resistance from clients to have meetings over Zoom. So that meant I've spent a lot of my time on planes or on trains travelling to meet people and to have meetings with people. But now COVID's come along, and Zoom's the best thing since sliced bread, and they all suddenly realise that they can save money on travel expenses and this, that and the other. But then you hear the government saying, but we've all got to get back to the office, because otherwise the coffee shops will close and the city centre shops will be... Now, that's true, but has the world changed to suggest that actually what we should be doing is re-envisaging the city centres? So, yes, maybe those coffee shops and supermarkets can't be supported by the working population, but what happens if all those empty offices get envisaged as homes or flats or whatever it is? Just change the landscape. And those people who maybe find it a little bit difficult because their networking meetings have stopped or they're no longer meeting up with their colleagues, that we may never go back to the way it was, because this is for better or for worse a new way of working. And the best way, going back to the marketing lessons that we were talking about, the best way to get ahead is to stand out in a way that doesn't annoy people and that engages people. And now that's a marketing view, but from an individual point of view, embrace the new technology, become comfortable with it, and you can still tap into your network, you can still tap into your colleagues, you can still tap into the things you like, the things that motivate you and stimulate you. It's just a different way of doing it, and it's almost that don't wait for it to go back to the way it was, because it might not. And I know that's not easy, but that's a Gen Xer talking who doesn't understand how he got into this position where he's comfortable with all this snazzy technology.
Rodger, I am looking at the time. We have been talking for a long time, and we should probably bring things to a close soon. But there is one question I really want to ask you,
okay,
which is a bit of a flip away from what we were talking about just now.
Okay.
And that is, when you're doing video content, something you do, and when I see people do this, I really admire it, because I currently do not, and I know I would find it really difficult, and that's, you're filming out in public sometimes.
Yeah.
How do you do that? I've got to ask you.
Oh, well, let me just start by saying you only ever see the completed video. And honestly, walking around town, I mean, I use a Lumix DSLR camera, which isn't the biggest you can get, but it's not small and compact like an iPhone. And I've also got a great big directional mic on top of it, and I often have a sort of tripod stand, so it's fairly noticeable. So honestly, Bob, there is many times when I've said to my wife, I'm just popping down to the harbour, or I'm going into Edinburgh to do a video, and I've got there and I've wandered around and I've thought, you know what, there are too many people around here, and I chicken out and I bottle it, and you never see any of that.
I'm really glad.
You don't see any of that, or there'll be I was down at the harbour doing a video yesterday, and it was a glorious day, absolutely glorious day, and I was down early and there was nobody about, and I absolutely nailed this take almost in one. I think I had to restart one bit towards the end, and just as I was about to finish, some woman came and right up behind me on a bike and stopped to ask me something, and it totally and utterly ruined the entire shot. But I'd been careful to go down to the harbour early because I knew there wouldn't be that many people around. But I can guarantee if I'd have gone down in the afternoon and it had been busy, I would have. But having said that, if you are out and about, the main thing to remember is that most people might glance at you and think, oh, that guy's got a big camera. Oh, that microphone looks a bit phallic, or whatever it might be. But then they'll go on to thinking about whatever else it was that was worrying them, whether they're going to be late for a meeting, or whether they're going to get home in time for tea, or whether they're going to miss Coronation Street, or whatever. They might give you an instantaneous thought. They may even think you look like a prat, but they'll only think it for a microsecond. They don't care. And if you can get that into your head, then, who cares? Just do it. Just do it. No, nobody really minds.
So that's what it boils down to, is just suck it up, buttercup.
I think so. Yeah. I mean, let's face it. I said to you, I wish that I'd had access to video when I was in my 20s and I had hair. And, nowadays I sometimes look at myself. I've got a great big round face, bald and everything like that. In my early 50s, I'm saying, this is not a pleasant thing to look at. I'm not Bruce Willis in his 20s or Pierce Brosnan in his 20s. This is me. But there are a lot of people out there who just will relate to somebody who has got a message and has got some enthusiasm, and you just have to overcome that. Some people don't like the sound of their own voice. Some people don't like how they look. And if that is you, you just have to try and find a way of overcoming it.
I think the answer is repetition.
Yeah.
You can become accustomed to that quite quickly, but
Mm-hmm.
it is quite visceral when you're new to it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Rodger, we should bring things to a close.
Yeah.
And I have become accustomed to asking all my guests the same question towards the end of the interview.
Yeah.
And that's, what's one thing you do now that you wish you'd started 5 years ago?
Ooh.
And normally I give them a little bit of warning. For the listener, I haven't given Rodger any warning.
Yeah, do you know, one of the things that does annoy me a lot at the moment is this, as a podcast host, and I'm sure you get this all the time, you probably get approached by podcast guest agencies, and they'll say, Bert Smith from New Zealand is a great fit for your podcast. And
You're triggering me, Rodger.
and I'll read this email and I'll think Bert Smith is absolutely nowhere near what I need from our podcast, and this agency hasn't done any research on A, my podcast, or B, my audience. And I usually ignore the email, and then the following day or 2 days later, I'll get the just circling back to see what you think about, or just bubbling this to the top of your inbox, or what did you think of Bert for your podcast? And in the end, I'll just probably write something, I'm sorry, but Bert's not very suitable for my podcast, but thanks for thinking. I don't like to be rude to people, but thanks for thinking of me anyway. And on the one hand, that annoys me, Bob, it really does. But one of the failings that I have had and still have to a certain extent is that as a marketer, I guess I'm not a salesperson. And I'll often send a proposal and never hear anything. And I might send a reminder once, rarely twice, because I don't want to be that pushy person who circles back or who tries to bubble things to the top of inboxes. But do you know what? I think in this busy world, the reason that they do it is because in a blink of the eye it can be gone. And I think that sometimes going back, I might have got a bit more business early on as a consultant if I'd just been a little bit more pushy, but without being too annoying about it.
Yeah, that's a really good answer. I think we could all do with being slightly more tenacious from time to time.
Mm-hmm.
Some of us, maybe less so, if the podcast agencies are listening.
Yes.
Rodger Edwards, you've been a fantastic guest. If people want to get in touch with you, and in particular if they want to find out A, when your book's going to be available, and B, how they can get it, how would you like them to do those things?
Right, my website is rodgeredwards.co.uk. There is going to be a dedicated page for the book by the time this podcast comes out, and that'll be rodgeredwards.co.uk/book, just to keep it simple. I am on Twitter a lot, so at Rodger_Edwards, if you want to hit me up on Twitter, that would be absolutely fine. Always happy to have a chat.
Rodger Edwards, thank you very much for your time on the show. Hopefully I can have you back again sometime once the book's been out for a while. You can tell us how it's going. But for now, thank you very much for your time.
Fantastic, Bob. Always a pleasure to speak to you, mate. Thanks.
Embracing the media company or creator culture isn't about looking for a tactical advantage. It's a long-term play, which, if you're doing it right, becomes part of who you are, part of your lifestyle. It doesn't just position you differently in the market, although it does. It positions you differently in life. It's a hard thing to explain, but if you're listening, you can pick that up from guest after guest after guest, and with Rodger, this really stood out. Before I go, just a quick reminder to subscribe, and if you haven't, then join my Facebook group. You'll find a link in the show notes, or visit amplifyme.fm/insiders. I would love to connect with you on social media. Follow me wherever you hang out. Just search at Bob Gentle. And if you do connect with me, let me know. That way I can follow you back. If you enjoyed the show, then I would love for you to review on iTunes. It means a lot to me, and it's the very best way to help me reach more subscribers. My name's Bob Gentle. Thanks again to Rodger for giving us his time this week, and to you for listening. And see you next week.